All right, so I think we're gonna go ahead and get started. So I wanted to thank you all for coming to today's talk on the science of effective mentorship. Our speaker today is Dr. Christine Fund, who earned her PhD in cellular and molecular biology, followed by a postdoc in plant pathology at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. She served as the Associate Director of the Delta Program in Research, Teaching, and Learning, helping to train future faculty members to become more effective teachers. Currently, she's authored a few manuals for facilitators on this seminar, Entering Mentoring, and co-authored several papers documenting the effectiveness of mentor training. Currently, she's co-leading 2 studies focused on the impact of training on both mentors and mentees and understanding specific factors in mentoring relationships that account for positive student outcomes, including the role of culture. She is the director of the Center for the Improvement of Mentored Experiences in Research, or CIMER, and the director of the NIH-funded National Research Mentoring Network Coordination Center.
Great, thanks, Catherine. Well, it's great to be here, and thanks, Peter, for the invitation. I am wondering, since we have a small group that might afford us the opportunity to go around, I'd love to hear who's joining us today to learn a little bit more about you. And then I can do a bit of a formal presentation about the science of mentorship. But certainly with a small group, that definitely allows us to really don't feel like you can't interrupt or ask questions. We don't have to hold them till the end. We can just have a discussion around kind of using the science of mentorship to optimize your own practices, but also to think about advancing cultures of inclusive mentorship. So if that's okay with you, Catherine, maybe we could go around and have folks introduce themselves. Do you want to go first?
Sure. So I'm Catherine Fernandez. I am a 2nd-year graduate student here at George Mason, and my research is in physics education. So I actually went to one of your talks in 2018. I think it was at the National Mentoring Community Conference. So my research is trying to incorporate how we can build physics students' identity and sense of belonging through the use of undergraduate mentorship programs. So I am very excited to hear your talk.
Wonderful. Well, great. Hopefully we can connect after today and hear about your exciting work. I'll just call on folks because I can see your names. How about that, Peter? I know we've met before, but go ahead.
A couple of years ago as well, as when you came to give us a talk at Vanderbilt University as part of our NSF Includes pilot study. I found your talk very informative and useful, and was excited to bring you back here to talk. We do have this talk recording, and I'm hoping that some of our faculty will, hi, if you're watching this, thank you for watching. We'll be able to hear some of what you have to say asynchronously. We have a fairly diverse audience here in terms of career stage. And so I think it'd be interesting to hear some advice from you on how students can help improve the mentor relationship as well, given the power dynamic that exists.
Absolutely. Great point, Peter. And Becky. Becky, you're on mute.
Sorry, Becky Erickson, but I have my Doctor of Arts came from George Mason in community college education, and I've been doing undergraduate, actually basically just gen ed astronomy for quite a few years. But one of the things that we do, we have a lot of sections, so I end up having a lot of people who are teaching the labs, and I had not ever learned anything about mentoring, and I realized that's something very important when you're trying to help other often very new instructors to teach these labs. And it was one of the things that I took the job for because I wanted to learn how to do that, but I've never had formal instruction in it. And although I'm reaching the end of my career, I really would like to learn more for the next year or two. So thank you for being here.
Great, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Faith.
Hello, I'm Faith Gale. I am the Human Resources and Administrative Specialist for the Department of Physics and Astronomy. I also support Spectrum in various capacities. And this talk will actually help inform our hiring decisions. So I'm interested to hear what you say.
Great, wonderful. And Natasha.
Hello, my name is Natasha Latouf. I'm a senior undergraduate here at Mason, and I'm also a mentor and co-founder of Spectrum. Mentoring has always been part of the reason that I actually ended up staying in the field to begin with, and learning how to best mentor other incoming students so that they don't have to struggle the way that, you know, I and several others before me have had to is a very important topic for me. So I'm very excited to hear what you have to say.
Great. And Luis.
Hi, my name's Louis. I'm a third year
Louis.
physics PhD graduate student. And the work that I'm working on is primarily looking at black holes and these active galactic regions and just trying to just understand them more, their physical processes and stuff.
Great. Well, it's great to have you, Louis, and great to meet you. Well, thanks for taking your lunch time, and hopefully this will be useful to you and those who watch it later. Since we do have a small group, I'd actually say let's not use the chat, only because if you want to interrupt, just feel free to just unmute yourself, and we can just have a conversation around the topics I'm going to be sharing with you today. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. It may look like I'm looking above the camera, and that's because I had to do a last minute switch of location due to some craziness going on in the house about 20 minutes ago. It's all good, but I have a monitor above my camera. So it'll be like, you know, if you're in the theater and you're looking to the back of the audience, I'm just going to treat it like that. But it might look a little odd if you're watching my video at the same time. All right, give me just a minute here. All right. Catherine, are we good on the
Yes, you can see your
slides?
screen.
Great. All right. And these are, I sent these to Peter, so if somebody wants them afterward, you certainly can ask for them. Right, there we go. So I think just to start today is, and this won't surprise any of you and probably why you came today, is that mentoring is really important. And it's certainly not the only factor in trainee success across career stages, but it's a major determinant in the likelihood of that success. And what I mean by success is all of the things you might think about. So, you know, Catherine, to your point, it's success in terms of science identity. It's success in terms of progression through the degree. It's success in terms of moving on the career path. It's academic success. It's science success. It's publication success. So there's lots of ways to think about success, but it has been linked to success across all of those outcomes. And unfortunately, even though it plays this really critical role, there's a very uneven landscape of mentoring. So I won't go through all of these, but there are many examples. These are just 4 in which we see that folks from traditionally underrepresented groups are reporting less access to mentoring and less access to quality mentoring. And so one of the most famous reports coming out of that is looking at people winning NIH research R01 awards, showing that white investigators were significantly more likely than Black and Hispanic investigators to get those high profile research awards. And one of the reasons given for this was lack of access quality mentoring. We see this in differing across gender, offers to mentor people. We see this across people, underrepresented folks and white female students, their career advice being often more ignored than those coming from white males. And even we see it in hiring and training and just people's ability and access to that. So there has been a huge national focus on mentoring, and Peter and Catherine, you know, we have connected in the past, and even in just those 2 years, there has been a huge push and advancement in the focus. So I just give you some of the federal and private foundations and some of their investment and call to attention mentorship. So, you know, NSF, the Sloan Foundation, NIH, Howard Hughes Medical Institute, and the National Academies. And one thing I want to highlight is a report that was released just actually almost exactly a year ago which is a report on the science of effective mentorship in STEM. And so this report I wanted to use as a foundation today to introduce you to some of it, because I think that it really is helping us get a handle on where we are in the science of mentorship. And yes, there is a science of mentorship, and where we need to go. The other thing that might be useful in your own exploration of mentorship, but also in making the case for a department or an institution really advancing its efforts, is another National Academies report. This is the one produced on the Committee for Graduate STEM Education in the 21st Century. This was released in May 2018. There was a huge focus of this report on mentoring in graduate education. It matters. Mentors and advisors need support and resources to do that job well. So Becky, you raised this as like, you're being called to invest and help advance mentorship, and yet how do we learn how to do that, and does that work count? And also for mentors and advisors to form networks of support and have incentives for that work. So I want to focus on this National Academies report, The Science of Effective Mentorship in STEM, and you may or may not have seen it. It's pretty bulky. It's like 320 plus pages. I'm sure you've all read it, bedtime reading, but give you a bit of an overview. So this is just for the sake of what the report contains. I am not going to go through all of it, but just to give you a sense of the types of topics it dives into. This is the committee that and the funders of this report. I had the honor of being on this committee. And so it was absolutely a labor of love for somebody who works on mentorship to dive into all of the literature on mentorship and see what is the current status of what's known and what needs to be known. So the first thing the committee had to grapple with is, what are we talking about when we talk about mentoring? And in fact, we actually decided not to go with the term mentoring and went for mentorship. And part of this is that there are a lot of definitions out there. And if you just think about, if you ask somebody like, what is mentoring? And I see Catherine smiling, because as you've dove into your own work, you've probably been like, oh my gosh, there are so many definitions. This is the definition that the committee has put forward. So the first thing you'll notice is we moved from mentoring to mentorship. And this is to honor the fact that mentee and mentor both play critical roles in a traditional dyadic relationship. And if we say mentoring, it puts all of the onus and all of the focus on the mentor perspective. And so this is to call to attention of the need to think about the players in the relationship. So mentorship is a professional working alliance in which individuals work together over time to support the personal and professional growth, development, and success of the relational partners. Both mentors and mentees get something out of this. And it focuses both on career support, which is what we often focus on in mentoring, but also psychosocial support. Both of those are critical for mentee talent development. And just to avoid getting mixed up with all the other terms that often are synonymous or used to describe mentoring, it supports processes like teaching, coaching, all of these important skills that in the holistic development of STEM professionals, including STEM identity development. So one of the things I thought is it might be fun, and we don't have to do this in the chat, is just to take a minute and think about how impactful mentoring relationships have been up to your point in your career. And you don't have to, we're not going to do a poll or anything. But if you just think for yourself how important they are. And when we often ask this question, it's pretty rare to not see almost everybody saying they were very important or extremely important, even if they weren't great relationships, but they play important roles in our own experience. You don't need the literature to tell you how important mentors are. They're important. And when the relationships don't work, they can be incredibly detrimental. And so it's really important. Their impact is huge. So we're not going to go through all this. And I will admit that I included some slides in here for reference for folks who couldn't join us today, and also for your own reference as you're going back. So there's a huge literature on why mentoring matters. And so I'll just highlight back to my first slide is it matters for persistence, degree completion, integration into the academic community, recruitment. It enables mentees to see themselves as more competent. It builds their self-efficacy in many domains, and they're more likely to publish, which is a huge important thing in moving forward. And the committee also started to think about what do we mean? What are the elements of mentorship? And so none of these will be surprising, but they're things we don't often talk about. Trust, self-reflection, expectations, and education. And I want to highlight the last one is mentorship is not something we're born knowing how to do, just like teaching. It's not like you wake up and you're like, I know how to teach. Some people naturally do have some skills that lend itself to being effective teachers and mentors, but it is a learned skill. And mentorship education can influence mentors and mentees' attitudes, self-efficacy, and behaviors. So even mentors who have 20 years of experience, have mentored 50 students, does not mean they can't optimize their practice. It also doesn't mean that they won't enter into a relationship that's unlike any of the 50 before it. And so it's important to have a deep and rich toolbox. Mentoring moves through these stages over time. So there are concrete stages. There's initiation, there's cultivation, there's separation, and then redefining the relationship as we move through different career stages. And oftentimes in the mentoring relationship, we end up spending a lot of work in mentoring on stage 2, but we don't tend to how we're orienting or initiating those things. And that's one of the most critical elements and time stages of mentoring. And we also don't spend enough time redefining the relationship or separating the relationship. Very little attention spent on closing and redefining, and yet it's critical for those long-term mentoring relationships. The other thing to highlight is that mentoring occurs in lots of structures. The classic dyad, especially in undergrad or graduate training, tends to be what we focus on, but there are lots of different structures. There's triads in which mentors and mentees have multiple mentor or mentees. There's group mentoring. So if you think of like a graduate student with your thesis committee, you would have multiple mentors playing different roles, and you have your peers helping as well. And then ultimately what we hope is that mentees have a whole network of mentors around them, with resources playing certain roles, individuals playing certain roles, peers playing certain roles, and mapping that out can be incredibly powerful. And a lot of our mentorship education helps mentors and mentees do that. So back to your point, Peter, of like the role of mentee, identifying what you need as a mentee and being able to articulate to a mentor is, I'm really needing you to play this role. And mentors being able to say whether they feel they have the skills and knowledge and time to play that role, or they need more resources and education to do it well, becomes a really important part of optimizing those relationships. So mentorship also, I think the committee wanted to spend time acknowledging that there are negative mentoring experiences. And mentoring relationships become less effective with mentors who are absent, set unrealistic expectations, don't provide clear, relevant guidance, or engage in manipulative behavior. And negative mentoring experiences don't always arise from ill intent. In fact, they often don't arise from ill intent. They often arise from otherwise good intentions that just are played out very poorly. There are absolutely cases of abuse, supervision, and harassment, and those need to be tended to very seriously and with professionalism. But there's a lot of negative mentoring happening simply because mentors and mentees don't know how to navigate the relationships effectively. The other point I want to highlight is that identity plays a huge role in mentoring relationships. So we often talk about trainees and their science identity. And I think at this moment in time, there is much attention also paid to their cultural identities. Both of those identities are linked to all of the outcomes that I mentioned before. And mentorship, when done well, can ameliorate the negative effects students' feelings of belonging or othered when their non-science identities in STEM help make them feel isolated. So this is really culturally aware mentors can really, really play a huge role in those senses of belonging and building their science identity. So again, just speaking to the need for culturally aware mentorship. So I want to pause there because then I want to talk a little bit about the recommendations of the report and what you as a department, as the Spectrum program, as an institution might think about doing to advance your efforts. So any questions or comments on what I shared already? And largely this is all from the report. So it's in the slides, and there's much more resources to back it up if you want to dig in, which I'll share with you at the end. And again, feel free to just come on audio because I am not monitoring the chat, just because we have such a small group.
Because this is really new to me, could you give a little bit more detailed explanation of those 4 stages, initiation, etc.?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah, so a lot of times, and so in your context, Becky, just so that we can make it meaningful for you, what are the, what is the mentoring scenario that plays out when you're working in the astronomy labs?
Well, I get assigned graduate teaching assistants to work with, and there's some full-time faculty as well, but the graduate teaching assistants and I meet weekly to talk about the labs, talk about teaching practice. And very often it fades into how are things going for you? What's happening in your life? How is your research going if you're doing that? How are the tests going that you're taking in your class, whatever. So we talk about a lot of things besides just teaching, but it's been a little bit less because of being online. I also mentor, and this is actually more formal mentoring in some ways, learning assistants that work with me on a day-to-day basis with my my classes as well.
Great, thanks. Yeah, so in your context, initiation goes all the way to when you first start working with all of those groups. So it is truly laying the groundwork, both for the work you're going to do together. So you probably spend a lot of time like, here's what we're going to do together. And what it does is it also starts to put a lot of emphasis on how we're going to work together. So this can be about what are our expectations for how we engage with one another, which can be the range of like, when are we meeting, to what's the nature of those meetings, to how do we communicate when we're not meeting expectations, to, you know, in the case of like, you know, labs like vacation, it can be all of those things. Once you're rolling, then that's the kind of cultivation stage. It's kind of, we call it like, if you know the stages of group formation, a lot of folks will say like, you know, you get through the forming and then the storming, you know, a little, and then you start performing. So that's like the cultivation stage. And then that next stage is also like, if you're done, like, so I'm sure for some of the folks you work with, you close it out after the semester. But for some, especially probably some that have asked you to serve other roles as mentor, it's going to continue. But if they're no longer working for you in the same way they were before, your relationship has to be redefined. Are you just going to have informal coffee? Do they still want to meet regularly? And so those are all in, and there are structures and supports and resources for each of those stages to help do them more effectively. Any other questions? All right. So one of the things the committee wanted to do is it outlined 9 recommendations. I am not going to go through them all. And the first 7 really highlight what institutions can do, department chairs can do, program leaders can do, mentors can do, mentees can do, associations can do, and then the final 2 are for agencies that fund programs and research. So these are really useful in thinking about if you as a program or you as a department, it really lays out some suggestions of where you can do to advance mentorship in your particular context. I want to focus on recommendation 2. It's where our work lives and breathes, which is mentorship education. How do mentors and mentees learn how to be more effective in their relationships? And so one of the recommendations is program leaders should support mentorship by providing tools, resources, processes, and providing opportunities for mentorship education. That is both for program leaders, mentors themselves, and mentees. So our work has really focused on how we learn how to mentor and how we learn how to be mentees. How do we engage in effective mentorship? So I'm just curious, have any of you had the opportunity to engage in any form of mentorship education? And that could be some form of mentee training, mentor training. Maybe you read a bunch of stuff on mentorship. Anybody had a chance to engage in anything they would say is mentorship education? You can just say yes or no, or you could come on video and raise your hand if it's yes. I saw Catherine kind of nod. Is that a yes?
Yeah, that's a yes.
Okay. Anyone else? Have you had a chance? Yeah, Becky, no. I know
No,
Peter's done some because, yeah, Natasha, no. Some with the Includes project. Faith, have you had a chance?
Yeah, at my previous institution, I was able to engage in some mentorship education through a first year program that we had.
Awesome.
No
So
official training on my end.
no official training, Lewis. Great, thank you. So again, this is not to say it's good or bad if you've had training or the training that you experienced was effective or not effective, but just to get a sense that it isn't something we all have the opportunity to do. So what we've done is we have really created evidence-based resources that we've made widely available to help advance mentorship education. And this has really been work we've been engaged in for about 17 years. So there's a whole bunch of mentorship education possibilities. I'll show you where to find these at the end. And so this includes mentorship education that is self-paced online. It includes mentorship education that is for mentors and mentees and could be taught face-to-face or synchronously online. And they're all based on evidence-based approaches. So some of the work we've done is 2 curricula called Entering Mentoring, which is mentor training, and Entering Research, which is mentee training. They're all process-based. They use case studies and group problem solving, and they're aimed at awareness raising. So things like exactly, Becky, like you asked, it's like, let's talk about the stages of the mentoring relationship and what that means to my practice. And it gives colleagues a chance to work together to help problem solve and address challenges that one another have. And then it gives you resources to continue your efforts. So it covers a whole bunch of standard learning objectives and competencies. These won't surprise you. They are things you would expect any mentoring relationship to want to address. How do you align expectations? How do you promote professional development? How do you effectively communicate? How do you address equity and inclusion and understanding? How do you foster independence and cultivate ethical behavior, and lots more? So I'm not going to go through this case, but to say, so these are the types of things we would do. You would have a case study. This is a case study about a student who is Linda, who's meeting with her thesis advisor and mentor. But every time they meet, the thesis advisor and mentor they love to just tell stories. And Linda's not getting what she needs out of the meeting. They have very different communication styles, not right or wrong communication styles, but it's not working. But Linda is the mentee and she doesn't know how to change the dynamic from her position so that the meetings work for her. So in the type of training we do, mentors and mentees could get together either as mentors alone or mentees alone or in combined groups and start to talk about approaches that could really help Linda gets what she needs and yet respect that Dr. S's communication so they could meet somewhere in the middle and make things more effective for everybody. Following discussion of the case, we would discuss and share barriers to effective communication, such as the ones I've listed here. We would discuss some of them. And then we would talk about action plans that people could do to advance their practice. We would encourage mentors and mentees to have a discussion about preferred mediums of communication, to discuss their communication styles and personal preferences, to schedule regular check-ins if they don't have them, to talk about how they track progress in writing and verbally so they could come back to them. Talk about how they prepare for meetings and how they're going to spend time in the meeting. Maybe they decide they're going to spend the first 15 minutes just checking in and telling stories, and then they're going to be agenda driven. And they could and opportunities to talk about cultural differences and similarities and how those can play out in communication. So that's just a little snapshot of what mentor and mentee training, the way that we approach it, is addressed. So I'm going to pause there and see if there's any questions or comments. And then the last thing that I have to share are just some resources that you might consider building upon as your group moves forward. And feel free to just come on audio. And I see Mike Summers has joined us as well. I won't put you on the spot, but you're welcome. We're a small group, so we're keeping it fairly informal. So if there's something that you'd like to ask, you're welcome to do it.
Thank you, but not at this time.
Okay, thanks. Any questions, or, Peter, in particular, anything that you want to highlight for the group that you were hoping we would chat about today?
So I guess a couple of questions, which are thank you, by the way, that's an excellent overview of the National Academies report, which I wasn't aware of at all, actually, and that it existed or that it took place, and highlighting some of the main points of the report. I'll definitely look more into that. Oh, you probably can't hear me. Is that better?
That's so much better. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry about that. So I guess one question I have is it advice you have for faculty on how to be I guess how to be a better mentor, right? When we don't have this formal training, in the sense of seeking these opportunities are one way, and you and I think, I don't know if you recall, we discussed this one kind of rubric for mentorship that I've been using, and I guess that's question number one, is kind of advice you have in that regard. And question number two, in our department, we're a fairly typical department. We have a fairly diverse campus, though, the most diverse in Virginia, and one of the most nationally diverse institutions. But our faculty are not diverse, and our majors are not diverse either compared to our student population. So we're clearly failing in helping students from underrepresented groups feel like they belong. And I think it's okay to admit that. And so I guess so question number two is related to how students can help when we have kind of faculty that don't care, or should we give up? And I guess question number three is, maybe I'd like to ask Spectrum to kind of talk about the initiative that they've started and that they've led, and I think would be very interesting to hear about and have a discussion about.
Great, thanks, Peter. So I'm just going to turn off my slides, and we'll come back to some of the resources at the end if there's some time, and if not, you'll have them. So let me try to take those in order. So first, just kind of like, how do we do a better job of mentoring? So I think there are lots of things out there, but let's be honest, how many people are going to go seek them out? I'll show you some in the resources, some easy things. And then there's lots of mentorship education we could go into. But I think sometimes the easiest thing, and I'd be curious to hear, especially from the mentees on this session today, is one of the great places to start is if we could just have mentors ask their mentees what's working for them and what's not, in a way that they felt they could be honest about it. And I'm going to deal with the power dynamic. So it might be in a group setting. We can think about the how. That would go such a long way. So we have so many well-intended mentors who are implementing practices based on either what worked for them or trying to do exactly the opposite because how they were mentored didn't work for them. So like, well, I'm not going to do that because that was horrible. And there's a whole spectrum of tools and approaches in between. So that may seem like a very easy answer, but literally if we could create spaces, and when I think right now in this moment in time, their students and especially graduate students are being incredibly vocal on campuses across the country about what's not working. This is a moment to talk about what could we do that is working. And it doesn't have to be full on mentorship education. It could be like, wow. So here's an example. We hear from thousands of trainees across the country that expectations are not clear. And we hear from thousands of mentors that they think they are. That is a fixable problem. Whether that's mentoring compacts, whether that's having sessions, But if we could be on the same page about expectations, and to be honest, is when expectations are unclear, guess who gets left behind? People who aren't socialized to the academic enterprise. So clear expectations, aligned expectations levels the playing field when we're talking about diversity, because everyone has the same information. So that's just one example of one small bit, but I'd love to hear from the folks who are in the mentee perspective about what if there were one or two things that could help the mentoring relationships from your perspective, what would they be?
I didn't hear the last part of your question. I don't know if it's that my internet cut out or something that happened.
Yeah, you're frozen for me, but that doesn't tell me whose it's gone out on. So the last part was, from a mentee perspective, what do you wish mentors would at least know or could do differently? And you don't have to speak for your own mentor, just in general from what you've heard.
I mean, I can second the not clear expectations. I've heard that from a lot of students. I know just from my own personal experiences, I've struggled trying to communicate what I need from my mentors without kind of like discouraging them, because I don't want it to come across as like I think that they're a terrible mentor, because I don't. It's just, I've always struggled with how do I clearly, communicate what I need and advocate for myself, but also like somewhat encouraging them to like keep trying new things.
Great. Thank you for sharing that. Anyone else want to share from that perspective? Mike, you're muted.
Okay, sorry. Sorry about that. I'm not a mentee, but my son is a second-year graduate student in physics at UC Davis. And so I'm getting to hear his side of the story now and hear about his frustrations with his advisor. And so I'm learning a lot. I'm learning about a lot of the things I did wrong. And the one thing I did wrong was to talk too much and not ask along the way if I was being understood and if the expectations were clear. Because my son is constantly asking me, well, what did he mean by this? When he said this, what did he mean? Or what do they want? What the professors want. And that's a failing that I've had. I talk too much. And just to share that part of it, that's all I wanted to share, was that the lack of clear expectations is certainly a problem in his case. I can't speak for anyone else, and I really shouldn't be speaking for him, but that's what I've learned by talking with him. That's all.
Thank you. Yeah, I do. Thank you for sharing that and naming that. Is I also talk too much. And so I think that's another thing to say, is that it's really interesting, because as somebody who studies mentoring, there is an assumption that I know how to mentor super effectively. And I've had mentoring failures. I've had a student leave and say, this doesn't work for me. I've talked over people, not aligned expectations, all of that. It's always a work in progress. And every relationship is different, but it's becoming better at going, ooh, that's not working, or creating space so that, Catherine, when you say, I'm not sure what I need, but this isn't working, can we work on that together, and not have that become a huge conflict? Yeah. Is that it's back to that definition as, what does it mean to be in a working alliance with someone? Right. Mm-hmm. I mean, what does that actually mean to both of you, at least in a classic dyad? The other thing that's really helpful with mentors and mentees is to not have these open-ended, like, what do we need from each other? So what we've created is a lot of lists of, what are the things that mentors and mentees typically need from each other in the research domain, in the interpersonal domain? And we've written on this, on the psychosocial domain, in the cultural diversity domain, in the sponsorship domain, so that mentees can like, if I needed 3 things right now, here are the most important. And mentors aren't going like, so think about it this way. When somebody comes up to you and says, can you be my mentor? What does that mean? Does that mean you want me to cheerlead for you? Does that mean you want me to read everything you wrote? Does that mean you want me to help you with experiments? We use this term from the beginning that is so big that it actually is meaningless. And so what we are really promoting both in our work and the academies is to start talking about roles. Talking about roles also helps because it means one person doesn't have to serve all functions. So that as mentors, I can say, I actually don't have the time to help you on, I'll just make something up, coaching you on grant writing. Now, however, because I can't do that or I don't do that well, let's talk about who might in your network be able to serve that role right now. So that it's about making sure that trainees have the support system they need without taking it all on, especially in areas that we're still trying to figure out how to do well. If you have mentors that are completely uncomfortable dealing with the psychosocial aspects of mentoring, I don't want to let them off the hook. But as they're developing more comfort and skills in that area, you don't want to put all your eggs in that basket. You want a mentor to be able to say, yeah, you should find somebody else who's helping motivate you. And the other thing, the last thing I'll say about that is when we talk about roles, it's not as personal. It doesn't say, hey, Peter, you're not being an effective mentor for me. It says, hey, Peter, I'm not getting what I need in terms of encouragement. Can we either work on that or do you have suggestions for where else I could find that? It's about a role. It's not about a personal attack or a personal shortcoming. It's just like if we said, hey, I need you to do this experiment. And you were to able to say like, I'm probably not the best person to come to about that. I can learn and help you, but that's not the thing. It's not trying to pretend that we know how to do everything. And that can relieve some pressure and have much more honest conversations. So the tools that come in mentorship education, back to your point, Peter, I know we're still on your question number one, help to have everybody come to the conversation with language. So even if you don't do full mentorship education, some of these tools can be incredibly helpful in helping mentors and mentees discuss those things. So even Mike, your son, can he talk about the roles that he needs and have a conversation saying, what I really need right now is this. And sometimes what somebody really needs, I need to know exactly what you're expecting from me in the next 3 months. And for mentors is to not unconsciously say, but that was the test I was giving you, is to see if you could figure out what you need to do. And because this is what causes the unequal playing field, is then now you've decided you've created a test in which everybody doesn't have the same resources to pass. Because that comes down, being able to pass that test has to do with socialization, not with innovation, not with skill, not with talent. It's about access and socialization, but we don't realize we do it. So to your second question, Peter, what about mentors who just don't care or want to get better? So I have 2 answers to that. Any department or group that is trying to advance their mentorship, let's say you wanted to invite people to be part of mentorship education, and you have 3 people who are like, I don't need that. If you can, they may be powerful voices. Don't worry about them. There's a critical mass, you can shift a critical mass. I know that there are some naysayers that are very vocal and they have power. But the other thing is that if you start to make visible the people who are engaged in advancing and trying, students have huge power in who they choose to work with. So I'll give you an example. We know a department that all they're doing is putting an asterisk next to the advisors who have gone through some type of mentorship education. They're not saying anything. But when students decide who to work with and they say, what's that? And they look down and it says, this mentor has engaged in advancing their mentorship practice. That's powerful. So your third question, I've now lost track of.
Yeah, so by the way, I'm going to insert another one. I was really impressed to see the study highlight mentoring and retention of graduate students, because anecdotally, I saw that myself as a graduate student. All the graduate students that I knew from undergrad and grad school that didn't succeed, seemed like the common theme was the mentor. And
that's true with faculty retention too. So that's not just that's all across the board.
So I personally, funny you should say about screwing up. I like to think that I do an okay job being a mentor, but particularly this semester, I have failed some of my students that I've been mentoring, and that's a new situation for me. And so, any advice you have on how to mend fences? But the third question, and help the students I've been mentoring move forward. And then the third question was, I really would like to highlight it's not really a question, I really would like to highlight the Spectrum, which is the new student group we have here in our department that is trying to help students at Mason build identity through peer mentoring. And so I just want to put them on the spot to talk about their initiative and ask any questions they may have, because I think it's a fantastic initiative. It's a proven method of helping with identity building.
Absolutely. Love to hear from them. I will say that for your situation, Peter, is everyone is not, I shouldn't say everyone, most of us are not mentoring the way we would like to mentor right now. It's just unprecedented. We did write an article that will be published soon, but we put it on a preprint server about using this moment to revisit and reimagine our mentoring relationships, which even has some suggested question prompts to use with mentees to help get things on track. So I can share that with you, and you can forward it afterward. It's not the be all end all, but it's to help us kind of take a moment and go, you're not alone. And it's not all lost, but actually using this moment to reset the relationship, because regardless of how well you're doing, there's a reset that's happening anyway, just by where we are. But I would love to hear, about the group. And you're absolutely right. I mean, peer mentoring is so powerful in identity development, and there's some great examples. And the one thing I'll say is that mentorship education and preparing peer mentors for what they're engaging in is really important, because in the same ways is that, if we think about it, mentors and advisors are trying to figure out how to do it. It's not like everybody woke up and knew how to be a peer mentor. There are many of the same things apply in terms of how to do that well, and also how not to burn yourself out in the process.
I have a question to add on very quickly related to what Peter's been talking about before explaining a little bit more about what Spectrum does. So I know that you mentioned like cultural identity and this cultural component to mentorship. Is there, I guess, like some sort of module or anything that helps mentors to be trained? I don't know if cultural sensitivity is the right way to phrase it, but like I've struggled because sometimes I feel uncomfortable in a mentor-mentee relationship where I feel like I can't really share all my culture because I'm Cuban and Hispanic, and generally there's a lot of drama in the family, and I'm just like, I can't unload this on you. I'm gonna like freak you out. So how can we best prepare mentors to not, I don't know about not be surprised, but like just to make the relationship more accessible from both sides?
So there are modules. In fact, there are resources and modules, and there's some being tested actually through the National Research Mentoring Network. But there are also some tools and suggestions actually in the National Academies report. And one of the things that's in the resources of this PowerPoint deck is, so the National Academies report that I shared with you, it's long, it's great, it's resource, but what we were charged with doing when we made the report was also making an online guide so that everybody didn't have to read the report. I know you're all dying to read the report, but come on, how many of us have read a whole National Academies report? It's a lot. So the online toolkit actually has things that drop down. So it's like, what are the big takeaways about identity and mentorship? And what's the big takeaway about cultural aware responsive mentoring? What are tools we could use? So I want to just let you know that that's really accessible, and hopefully, and please give us feedback, helps you dive into and find exactly what you want. I think one of the things, and there's a wonderful article that I can also share with Peter that a Black scholar wrote. She's a Black medical student in the Huffington Post several months ago. And it's about how every time people asked her how she was, and you can probably relate to this, is you're like, fine. Even though all the trauma going on, all the drama, all the navigating her identities, she just checks it at the door, the virtual door now, and says like, I'll just focus on the science. I'll just focus on medicine. And yet that's impacting her ability to work. And it's really great because what it says is that one day she just decided she wasn't going to say fine. And she actually shared with her mentor what was actually going on. And to her surprise, the mentor actually was very receptive and they had a great conversation. But her point in the article at the end is that she, in the position of being not in power, shouldn't have been the one to ask. And I think that if you take anything away is that mentors in their positions of power, even if it's uncomfortable, have to try to open the door to conversation. It could be sharing something from their own background, not falsely trying to say they understand your Cuban experience, but saying, how are you actually doing? How are you navigating everything, with your family? How are you can go to your own comfort spot, but opening the door to that, because if they don't, then how do you know it's okay to go through it in a safe way? That's going to be, and yet if you have to check it at the door, the cognitive and emotional energy to do that is enormous. It's enormous. And it's actually taking away from your ability to function productively because all of that energy in checking it. And so I think this moment in time, and this is also addressed in the article I mentioned, is even if you wanted to avoid it as mentors in the past, you can't now. You can't. And so what do you want to do about it? And so we actually even give some discussion prompts to open the door to that. So it would be great if you feel like you could share it. And we'd encourage mentors that they can tell you ways. There's so many messages to send that it's okay that if you need to say like, there is craziness going on in my family and it's impacting my work, that there's not a penalty for that. So that's just a little bit of tidbit, but a lot of that is really gone in. I mean, if mentors want to do deep cultural responsive mentorship training, they can do that. Everybody's not going to do that out of the gate. So we have to also be honest about it, but it's there if they want to. So there's 4 minutes and I want you to have the last 4 minutes to talk about Spectrum. I did provide resources in the slides that'll be made accessible to you for the National Academies report, all the work we do through our center. One of the white paper task force I had the pleasure of being on from the American Astronomical Society about what folks can do to make their departments and programs more inclusive. So I put a link in the resources for you, as well as a really wonderful mentee guide from the Council of Graduate Schools. I know some of you are earlier stage than graduate students on this call, but it's really, really useful in helping you navigate your relationship. So that's all in there and you can pull that out as you need. So Catherine, how about you take the floor for the last 3 minutes?
So I do want to highlight, I'm not the only one involved in Spectrum. Natasha is also a co-founder, and so are 2 other students that aren't here. But it kind of came to be from all of our own individual experiences and how much we've had to struggle to like continue to persist. And that's still a daily battle sometimes. But because of that, we were able to establish a code of professional conduct in the department, which is really wonderful. And everyone, for the most part, has been on board with all of our initiatives. But as Peter mentioned, we did start a peer mentorship program. So primarily we have upperclassmen, so like juniors or seniors as mentors. And then we have freshmen, sophomore, and sometimes transfer students as mentees. But we're also starting to incorporate a few graduate students as possible mentors for undergrads who really want to go to graduate school. We're still working on getting kind of the flip side of having career or like professional mentors. I think that's one of our future goals. But I think for me, one of the questions that I have, since I'm on like the research side of things, is how do we evaluate how we're doing as a program? Because this is the first year of Spectrum, so I'm kind of considering the mentorship to be a pilot program this year. So, I mean, I've heard about like qualitative ways, like different interview questions that you can ask, but I mean, I'm always looking for new tools to use. So I don't know if you have anything to suggest in that area.
Yes, why don't you email me? I have lots of things to suggest.
Okay, great.
And can give you some things to consider for sure, as well as refer you to a couple of studies that are recent where people did some really interesting evaluation of peer mentoring. And Natasha, I apologize, I didn't honor the fact you were a co-founder. Is there anything you'd like to say before we close?
Thank you. I think Kat kind of covered it. We're very proud of this, and especially with the professional development lunches and giving the opportunity for faculty and students alike to learn about issues such as mentoring, which is unfortunately kind of pushed to the wayside as a lot of the times as something that's obvious how you mentor someone, and it's really not. And there's a science and an art to it to be able to keep retention rates up, especially in minorities in the field. Yeah, so thank you very much for your time. This was highly informative and very useful, and hopefully we get a lot more people watching it in retrospect on our website.
No problem. I'm happy to do it. And thank you, Peter, for following up. It's great to reconnect with you. And yeah, and please reach out. I actually am one of those few individuals. I actually pretty much keep up to date on my email, so I actually will respond to you. That's not a judgment on anyone who doesn't. I just happen to be a kind of email inbox cleaner person, little OCD there. Great, Peter.
I am too. So thank you so much, Chris, for joining us today. I'll talk to you later, and thank you for joining our first grader in the background.
Sounds good, and congrats on your Spectrum group, and good luck.
Thank you. Just
you.
as a quick reminder for everyone, we want to be mindful of your time. Next week, we're having a panel on pathways after academia, so we hope to see you there too. All right, have a good rest of your afternoon, everyone.
Thanks so much for this.
Yeah.
Take care.